Hi, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to another happy hour at the Boro. Welcome to all. We will wait to see everyone come in. Hi, Shanice. Welcome. Please feel free to say hi so I can acknowledge you're there, and then give it a minute for others to join, and we will get started. Hi, Vanessa. Just giving a few minutes for people to come in just so that we can get started. We're talking about finances today, and we have an awesome guest who is coming and giving us a wealth of knowledge. And we just want to make sure that we have enough people to come in and not miss this blessing. Hi, Pi. Thanks for joining. Hi, Vanessa. I'm just going to give it a few more seconds and then we will get started. Okay, I think we can get started. Hi, all. Welcome to our second week at the happy hour at the Boro. I hope that you guys have had a great week so far. I hope you're all staying in, quarantining. And for those of you that do have to go out, we thank you again for your services, be it the nurses, be it the doctors, be it the delivery people. We thank you so much for all that you are doing for us. We are blessed to be alive, and let's be really grateful for that. We do have, just a lot of crisis going on. We have a lot of people in turmoil. A lot of people have lost their jobs. A lot of people are frustrated, confused, and worried. So let's take the gems that we have today. I'm going to ask Sandra to come in and open us in prayer and introduce us to our special guest.
Dear Lord in heaven, we praise your name. We praise you because no matter what, you are God and nothing changes. You're always on the throne, Lord. I ask as we begin to present this information that you're with the listeners and you're with the speaker, Lord. Help us to be able to take these gems and apply them to our lives. In your precious and holy name, amen.
Amen.
So I'd like to introduce Crystal Ward. Crystal E. Ward. She's no stranger to the Kingsborough family. Crystal is a professional development coach and personal finance expert. She has almost 20 years of experience in the banking industry. Crystal is passionate about helping others live their best life and boosting financial literacy. She's also the board chair for Unique People Services and the finance chair for Ephesus Seventh-day Adventist Church in Harlem. So let's welcome Crystal tonight as she begins to share with us. Thank you.
Thanks.
Go ahead, Crystal.
All right. So good evening, everyone. I am so excited to be here at Happy Hour at the Boro. It's my first time and hopefully it will not be my last, whether I'm presenting or just attending. I'm excited to be here. And I just want to thank Keisha and Sandra for the invitation. And as Sandra mentioned, I'm no stranger to Kingsborough at all. Have spoken there before on finance. I've attended for great concerts that you all have. But I'm glad tonight to be talking about managing through financial hardship. So it's no surprise to anyone that we are living in some times that are unlike anything we've ever seen before. And a lot of people are going through a lot of difficulty during this time. So what I want you all to know, for everyone who's watching, if you have any questions or any comments, this is going to be very interactive. So you can submit your questions or your comments on the little chat box, and then I'll be able to field them in as we go through the presentation. So what we're going to be talking about overall today is looking at your budget, kind of managing through credit, understanding more about your credit score, reducing debt, and a little bit about like what your net worth is all about. So everyone right now is affected by this thing called coronavirus. Everyone. Some people have been unemployed. Some people are still employed. Some people are underemployed. Some people have been laid off, and we know what being laid off means. And some people have been furloughed. Now, furloughed is a term that some people are wondering, well, what does furloughed mean? What's the difference between being furloughed and being laid off? So if you're laid off from your job, then you're now kind of terminated, so to speak, between you and your job. Furloughed, you're not laid off, but you're kind of put on hold until further notice. During that time, for some companies, you're not getting paid. Some companies might offer medical benefits during that time, but you're not getting paid. So what would then happen is once things become more established or back to normal, or whatever the new normal is going to be, then if there's a need for you to be brought back on, then you'll be brought back on. And that's just understanding what furloughed means. I just want you to get a sense of what those terms are, because we know what being unemployed is, what being laid off is, but there's a lot of terminology that's been buzzing around now. So just want to make sure that everyone had an understanding. So we see here that everyone is affected. And I'm sure all of us on this viewing this evening fall somewhere in this category, right? And there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of anxiety. But one thing that I want us to be reminded of is in Philippians 4:19, it says, "My God will supply all," not some, not a majority, but all of your needs according to his riches and glory by Christ Jesus. And I think it's important during these times for us to remember that God is still in control. So while the world may be in chaos, yes, some of us may have lost jobs, some of us may have been underemployed and reduced hours, but God is still in control. And what this text is saying to us is that he will supply all our needs. Now, it's important for us to understand this concept called needs and wants. Now, there's a lot of things that we have that are needs, and there are some things that we have that are wants. So I'm curious to hear from you. When we use the terminology need, can anyone tell me what is a need? What do you think a need is? Is anyone writing in, Sandra or Keisha? Okay, not hearing you guys, but so let's moving forward. A need is something necessary to survive, right? So that's what a need is. When we think about what a want is a desire for something. So now as you think about these times that we're living in, it's really important to understand what are the things that we absolutely need and what are the things that we may want, right? So when we think about needs, we have food, shelter or housing, clothes, now not just any type of clothes, but the bare necessities of the clothes that we need, toilet tissue, medicine, car insurance, gas for our car. Now there's other things that are needs, but these are some needs that we can think about. When we think about some of the wants, desserts and snacks. Now, why do I put that there? Food is an absolute need. But when you're in a dire situation, then you have to really think about, well, what's really, really important, right? Because as you think about your finances, then you have to think about what are the things that I really absolutely need to get? And what are some of the things that if I didn't have them, it would be nice to have, but I'm not gonna die if I don't have them, right? So some of them, desserts and snacks, cable. Now, I'm not saying that you have to get rid of these things. What I am saying is depending on your financial situation at this time, you have to look and think about what are the things that I absolutely can cut back on and what are the things that I absolutely need to survive, right? So desserts and snacks, cable, video games, new clothes, even though a lot of the stores are closed right now, but new clothes. So those who are trying to order on Amazon and order on different types of stores that you like, you shouldn't be doing that right now. Home decor. There's some people that are thinking, well, now is a nice time to either redecorate their place. These are all wants and not things that you really want to focus on during a crisis. Vacation. Now it's true that, prices for traveling and vacations and cruises are at an all-time low. But again, those are wants, not things that we need to be focused on right now. Expensive data plans. So you think about the phone plans that you have. If there's a way for you to cut back and survive on just the basic phone plan, these are some things that you would want to think about. So I encourage everyone, as you look at how you're living at this point, and each of you know what your personal financial situation is, you need to assess, well, what are my needs and what are my wants? And based upon knowing what your needs and your wants are, then what you need to do is now reassess your budget and gain control of your money. In the past, when I spoke at Kingsborough and when I've done other presentations, we talk about putting a budget together. So everyone should have a basic budget by which you live by. But in times of crisis, then you need to reassess what your budget is based on those needs and based upon what those wants are. So when we think about budgeting, some key terms I want us to think about is your gross income. And that's your total income before taxes. So if you make $50,000 a year, then that's considered what your gross income is. When you think about what your net income is, that's your spendable cash. So after our favorite Uncle Sam takes out of his money, after you return your tithe and your offerings, then what you have left to spend is what we would consider what your net income is for you to spend. Then we want to look at something called fixed expenses. So what are these things called fixed expenses? Those are those expenses that have a fixed dollar amount. So in other words, every month, you know exactly what the dollar amount is going to be. So when you think about your rent, you know if your rent is $1,500 a month, then you can plan and know that it's $1,500 a month. Your car payment, if your car payment is $350 a month, then you know every month it's $350. For you, your utilities, depending on what they are, then some of them are fixed and some of them are what we would call variable expenses. And by variable expenses, what I mean is that those expenses can change on a monthly basis. So if you think about gas, like right now, for example, a lot of you are not driving as much, but your gas expense has gone down, but it may not be the same from week to week. It depends on how often you're driving in the week, or depending on what you use for your electricity, then depending on those needs, it may vary from month to month. And that's what we call variable expenses. So once you've looked at your gross income, then you've now factored in what is your net income. From your net income, you're looking at all of your expenses. And once you've subtracted all of your expenses from your net income, then you have your bottom line. And at the bottom line, if it's positive, it's a term that we use, we say it's in the black. And if it's negative, it's in the red. So the goal is always to be positive. You don't want to have your budget in a negative situation. Now, unfortunately, because of the times that we're living in, depending on what your expenses are, if you find yourself in the negative, then what you want to do is to look in detail at your budget to see, well, what can you cut back on? So that goes back again to the needs and the wants. What can you cut back on so that you can bring your bottom line into being positive? So let's take a look at a sample budget, right? So for example, this person is making about $60,000 a year. And when we look at their gross income, so looking at it on a monthly basis, this person has a gross income of $5,000. So assuming we take 10% for tithe, 5% for offerings, and that's up to you in terms of what you want to use as your percentage for offerings, this person is returning $750 to the church for tithe and offerings. Here comes Uncle Sam, we have no control over that, who comes in with his taxes, and this person, based upon their income, is paying $1,500 a month towards taxes. We spoke a little bit before about the concept of a 401k, 403b, and an IRA. Now, these are retirement investment vehicles. If you work for a public company, then typically what they offer is a 401k. If you work for a not-for-profit or the government, then they have something called a 403b. An IRA, for those of you who may have your own business or you invest your funds differently, then you have that individual retirement account. So same concepts of using these funds towards saving for retirement. In this case of this budget, this person has allocated $200 towards their long-term retirement. Now, something that we want to think about as you look at your budget is for the 401k, 403b, and IRA, you want to adjust that as needed. So remember, what we're talking about now is times of crisis. If this wasn't a time of crisis, then what I would be advising you is to look at your 401k, 403b, and IRA and see how you could maximize that as much as possible. But in times of crisis, especially if you're in a tight financial situation, then you want to assess that to see if you can cut back just a little to make sure that you're able to meet your monthly obligations. So now let's look at our expenses for this budget that we're looking at. This person has rent and mortgage of $1,500. Their utilities are $200. Their car payment is $200. Their school loans are $200. Entertainment, $100. Now that could be anything. This person could have been going to dinner. They could have been renting movies online, various things. Vacation, you notice there's nothing there. Shopping, clothes, nothing there. Groceries, $150. Cell phone bill, $100. Now the same concept applies when we're thinking about in times of crisis, all expenses should truly be needs, especially if you're finding yourself in a situation where either your job has been cut or you've been laid off, or if you've been underemployed in that your hours are now reduced. You really want to look through your budget in detail to see, what am I actually spending my money on? Are there things that I can cut back on? Do I really need to have cable during this time, or could I save that extra money? So I encourage all of you to take a detailed look at your budget and make sure that all of your expenses are truly needs and not wants. And even as you go through the needs, like we mentioned earlier, food is a need, but then there's some elements of what food is that could be more of a want than a need, right? So you have to go through all of those things. So once you've created your budget, then you look again at your net income minus your expenses, and then you'll see savings versus loss. So I'm hoping that based upon the adjustments that you make, then you would actually be in the black and have something to save, or at least break even. And what break even means is that your income and your expenses are equal. So you're not creating any debt or putting yourself in a deficit position, you're just remaining neutral. So that would be the goal for your monthly budget. Now, something that I encourage all of you, if you don't have a budget, on my website, which is www.crystaleward.com, you can go and download a sample budget that you can start using to kind of see where things are for yourself during this crisis. I don't know if there's any questions or comments so far. Keisha, Sandra? Okay. I'm not hearing you guys, so I'm going to keep moving forward.
Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, we have one question that's come in. It's displaying from Sandra. It said, should we be making adjustments to retirement savings now, withdrawals?
So it depends, right? If you're finding yourself in a financial situation where you're able to manage, so you're able to meet all of your expenses, you're able to pay all of your bills, and you still are able to invest in your retirement plan as you have been doing, you should continue to do that. If you find yourself in a situation where you're unable to meet your expenses, and I'm talking again about what your needs are, you're unable to meet them, then your 401k, 403b, or IRA is something that you might want to consider maybe cutting back on what your contributions are towards that. And again, this is just temporarily because we're in a crisis period, right? So I want to make sure that everyone understands the principles that we're talking about today is managing through financial hardship. If things were different, then I would probably advise you on other things. All right, so just in summary on some of the things that we spoke about regarding budgeting, you want to, people always say, well, live within your means. Living within your means means that your spending is less than or equal to your monthly income. But what's advisable is to try your best to live below your means. So that's the foundation for good money management. A lot of times people think that because they don't have a lot of money, if they had more money, then they would be better off. It's not really so much about just having more money, because if you don't know how to manage a small amount of money, believe it or not, if you were given a large sum of money, you wouldn't be able to manage that either. So it's the concept of being able to know how to manage your funds. And that's why it's very, very important to create a budget. I pretty much know my budget in my head. But during this time, I had to think through, all right, what are some things that I need to cut back on? Or if I found myself in a worst case scenario, what are some things that I can totally cut back on, right? So those are the things you want to be thinking about. And then save. Now, in times of crisis, again, if you are in a financial position where you are able to meet all your expenses and you still have a little bit left over, then you should try to save that, right? If you are in a situation where you're unable to save, that's fine for right now. But what you want to focus on is trying to make sure that you really manage and monitor all of your expenses. And then I have invest. Now, again, this is because we're in crisis mode, only if you are ready and able. So there are some people, God bless them all, who their jobs have not really been changed significantly in terms of what you're getting in terms of income. They're able to manage your expenses. They're able to put funds away for retirement. They're able to save, and they still have funds left over. Now, if you are one of those individuals and you want to talk further about what do I do with those additional funds, that's something that I can talk to you about in more detail. I have a great friend who is a financial advisor. So usually people who are in that category, then I would recommend for them to speak with her in more depth about, what are some things and that they can possibly invest in. So again, the concept of investing at this moment is only if you are ready and able. Any questions or anything coming in this time?
No. If you have any questions, we've posted Crystal's website for anyone that needs to take it down. We will also provide it again. And again, if you watch this program after it's live, you can always email us and we will definitely get you whatever information from the program that we have done out to you. Our email is ay@kbtsda.org.
Thanks, Keisha.
You're welcome.
The next thing that we want to talk about is the bomb in your wallet. What is that bomb in your wallet? It's credit cards. Sure, everybody has a credit card. And we're going to talk about credit cards, right? Credit cards aren't bad things. Some of you, if you're from a West Indian household, African household, they're like, credit cards, no good. That is not accurate. Everything is about how you manage what you have, right? You have to use things to your advantage, but in order to use it to your advantage, you have to be educated on how it works, right? So I'm going to talk to you about a little bit about credit cards. Now, something that is important for us to understand is something called a credit score. And I'm sure many of you have heard credit scores before. And what is a credit score? It's a numerical assessment of your financial credibility or credit risk. Why is this important? If banks want to lend you money, if you want to go and purchase a car, buy a home, even to take out a store credit, they want to know what is your credit score. That's their way of assessing how have you managed credit in the past. And depending on how you've managed that, then you have a score that can range anywhere from 300 to 850. Now, anything that's around the 700, 725 range and higher is considered great. Anything below that, 600 is fair and good. You really don't want to fall below the 600 category. Now, what I want to say to you is if you find yourself in any of these positions, if you're in the great section, keep it up, keep it going. If you're not so great, this is not the end of the world. You can actually do things to turn your credit score around. So I just want you to be able to know that. And there's something called FICO score, right? That stands for Fair Isaac Corporation. So there's three main organizations that come together to bring up what your score and assess what your score is. So why is your credit score important? So as you can see, some of the things here that we all would want to use if you want to purchase a home. Apartment rentals. Now, there was a time where if you wanted to rent an apartment, they weren't looking at your credit score, but now they're actually looking at your credit score because people want to know, are you able to make payments? But not just make payments. Are you someone who has demonstrated the discipline towards paying for things on time? And that's what people use in terms of assessing when they look at your score. For a car purchase, there's very few people that are able to buy their car outright. If you're unable to do that, then they're going to look at your score because you're going to need to borrow money. And that's how banks are going to assess how well is your credit worthiness. Credit offers, personal loans. These are all some of the reasons why your credit score is important. At some point, if you're not, you don't have a home or apartment just yet, I know we're talking with the younger crowd. If you don't have those things as yet, at some point you're going to want to, and it's going to be important for you to have a good credit score. So now, how do credit scores impact you? On the positive side, if you have a great score, then it enables you to get lower interest rates. And we'll talk a little bit why that's important. It helps you in terms of speeding up your credit approvals. So for example, if I have a strong credit score and say someone else has a negative credit score or a lower credit score, in terms of getting things processed, like within the bank or whoever you're using to try to get a loan, it's easier when you have a strong score for things to get processed more quickly. Get lower insurance premiums. Positive impact on job prospects. Now, a lot of people don't realize that companies actually can assess and look at what your scores are. Now, this was something that typically applied to people within the realm of finance, but I've heard of individuals who are not in the world of finance and their credit scores have been assessed, right? So you want to think about your score when you think about all of these things. And you might wonder, well, why? If you can manage your credit well, it says something, or people look at that as seeing something about your ability to be disciplined and to manage well. So those are some of the things why I could see why employers would want to kind of get a sense as to what a person's score might be. Some of the negative impacts: higher interest rates, inability to borrow. So now you may be thinking some people may be able to borrow, but because their credit score is so low, you're going to get a high interest rate. So for example, if both you and I went to purchase a car and I have a better credit score, then the interest rate that they're going to offer me is going to be better, lower than what they may offer the person who has a negative credit score. But there are some situations where a person's credit may be so bad or so poor that they're not going to be able to borrow at all, right? So that's another a negative impact of how a credit score can impact you. And then negative impact on job prospects. So we spoke about the positive end of, if you manage it well, it's showing that you have good discipline, that you have probably a good ethic around managing funds. And the reverse is also true. Now, that may not be true about you, the person, but this is just the reality of the assessments that people make in terms of looking at your scores. Now, this is something that's important for us to note. No credit score can also have a negative impact. Does anyone have a thought as to why? I'll just give you a few seconds to see if any questions or answers come into that. If not, then I'll respond. So why do you think no credit score can have a negative impact?
No one's come in with that one, but I do have a few questions that have come in. Crystal, if you want to take a stab at them while people pose the answer to that.
Okay, we'll take the questions that came in and then I'll address that one.
Absolutely. The first one comes from Carlene Riley. She says, if you're struggling to pay bills, is there a hierarchy of bills to pay first if funds are too low to cover all?
So when you think about bills, if you're struggling, so there's a few things. You want to go back to like, what are your absolute needs and what are your wants? I'm assuming at the point of which you're at a dire struggle, then everything you're doing should be needs. So you think about housing and you think about food. Those are what you absolutely want to pay. If you have now outstanding bills, say your school loans, or you have other debt outstanding, in this particular time, more than ever before, if you were to call maybe Sally Main, I'm not too sure about Auntie Sally, but if you call your car insurance, if you call some of your utility companies, if you have outstanding bills because of what's happening right now with this crisis, some of them are willing to put some of your debt on hold. So I encourage all of you, if you have anything that's significantly outstanding or any of your utilities are too high for you to pay in full, to call them and use this pandemic to your best interest. So again, in terms of looking at your expenses, food and shelter is very high on the list. Once you've targeted those things, then you start looking now at what's important to you. A car may not be as important, but that depends. Again, if you're working in a job that having your car relies on you traveling back and forth, then that's going to be something that's priority for you. For someone else, it may not be priority, right? So you want to assess after food and shelter, looking directly at what are those other expenses and then start cutting back from there. But again, right now you can contact a lot of your utility companies, some of the other, your car insurance, and put some of your expenses on hold.
Okay, great. Another question has come in. It's from Marcia Sutherland. She asks, why on Credit Karma do they have two companies from Equifax and TransUnion? It's two different scores. Which one is the good one?
Well, the thing is, earlier when I mentioned the concept of FICO score, so it's all three of those companies kind of putting their score together to then do a true assessment. Each of them kind of rate things a little bit differently. When the bank is looking at your credit score, they're pulling all three of those companies, right? So when you go onto Credit Karma, see Credit Karma more as an overview, not your exact score, but it gives you a general sense as to where you fall. So for example, for me personally, on Credit Karma, I looked and I think my score was maybe like 811, right? And I went to purchase something, and when my score came out from the bank, it was, I think, like 800 or 799. In my mind, I'm like, but I remember seeing on Credit Karma, it was a little bit higher. So just know that Credit Karma gives you a general overview, and each of those companies look at different things. Your FICO score is now looking at a combination of all three of those entities.
Okay,
so don't get to, if your credit score, if you're on the higher end and your credit score is off by 5, 6, 7 points, like that's nothing to get too alarmed by once you're on the higher end.
Okay, and another question is, how can we try to rebuild our credit, especially when there are prior delinquencies or negative marks?
So what you want to do is to print your credit report. And further on the presentation, I'll share a website with you. It's called www.freecreditreport.com. Everyone should do that at least once a year to look at your report and see what are the delinquencies or if there's anything on there. Because a lot of times you may not recognize that there might be delinquencies that we're not even aware about. So go through them and then make phone calls to those organizations to which you may owe money, or figure out what it is that's causing the delinquency, right? And if it's something as simple as you might have an outstanding bill that you didn't realize that you still had, it could be $20. You'd be surprised that not paying $20 for months at a time can negatively draw on your credit score. I remember there was one point when, about probably 10 or so years ago, and I was looking to purchase a place, and my credit score was really good. When I went to the bank, everything was fine. I got my interest rate and everything was good, ready to move forward. And then about a month or so in, they ran my score again. And my score was down by, like, I wouldn't say almost 100 points. And I was panicking, like, how did it fall so far? I wasn't aware of anything. So lo and behold, there were some pots that I purchased from Macy's, and I decided to put these pots on my Macy's credit card, which I never really used. I used it because they were offering a discount. And because I didn't see the actual bill, then I didn't pay the bill when it was due. And by not paying that bill when it was due, because I always had such strong credit, having one delinquency dropped my score significantly, right? So you want to make sure to stay on top of things. If you're already in the space of being somewhat delinquent, then the reverse is true. Making steps towards making on-time payments will start to pull your credit in a higher direction. So I encourage you, print out your credit report, look to make sure that there's no discrepancies. If there's anything that you see, then call up the company and see how you can resolve it right away. And by doing that, if there's any outstanding payments that you can make, then you try to pay it off right away, and you'll slowly start to see your credit score improving.
Okay, I have one more question, and then I have an answer in regards to the no credit.
Okay.
So Marsha Sutherland asks, is this a good time to purchase a home and a car?
So again, it depends, right? And I remember when I was studying finance in undergrad and took a lot of economics courses, and you ask a question and the professor would always say, it depends. I can't give a blanket answer because it depends on each person's financial situation. Now, if you personally are able to manage all of your expenses, so if you think about the fact that your income is still strong, your current expenses are being paid, you're able to save for your retirement, you have some funds for your savings, and now you have a chunk of funds that you can use for a down payment. So remember, typically when banks are looking for a down payment for a home, it's typically 20% of whatever that home price is, right? If you're able to have 20% of that home price, and you're able to think about how you can manage payment and be responsible for the mortgage payments for that property, then it might be worth considering purchasing a home at this time. Right now, interest rates are really low. So it possibly could be a good time, but you need to make sure that your finances are in order. The worst thing that you want to do is to put yourself in a situation where now you're accumulating a lot more debt, especially if you're planning to purchase a house where you're going to be relying on tenants to help you pay the mortgage. Now, what if something happened to those tenants? If you recognize that you're unable to manage your current cash flow in addition to that new home clearly and solidly with the funding that you have, then right now might not be the best time to consider that, right? But again, it's something we can talk about offline. If you're at a point where you financially can manage that, then it might be something to consider.
Okay, great. So to answer your question about why is it not good to have no credit, Carlene says there's no baseline to assess credit worthiness. And Shanique states no credit score means lenders won't know your history of repayment.
Exactly. And both of you said it correctly. And the reason why I stress that is to kind of demystify the myth where a lot of parents would say, don't get a credit card. It's not good to have, and it's not a good thing. That's not actually correct or accurate, right? Because like you both mentioned in your answer, by having no credit score, someone can't assess you. And when someone can't assess you, then they're more than likely to think the worst and to think the positive, right? So if you have a credit card, it's good to manage that well. If you don't have a card and you're of a certain age, so 18 or above, then I'd encourage you to get one card. You don't need to have multiple cards, one card, and just manage it well so that you're able to build your credit score. All right, so just moving on quickly. So tips for managing your credit card. Make sure to.
So sorry, Crystal. I didn't want to ignore Jill's question.
Okay.
She stated, Dave Ramsey in Financial Peace University and the Bible advises against debt. What are your thoughts on that?
I think the Bible is the best financial book there is. When I think about all of the concepts I've learned in finance and in my years of banking, like the Bible has the answer. Debt is not a good thing. Think about why, right? If you owe someone money, for those of you who have school loans, and I know there probably was no way around it. You don't like when Auntie Sally is calling to get her money. It doesn't feel good, right? And that is the principle behind why the Bible talks about not incurring debt, because then you become a slave to the lender, right? And you don't want to be in that financial situation. Now, unfortunately, because of the times that we're living in, there's things that we can't fully buy outright. Like some people can't fully buy their car, they can't fully buy their house, but you want to strive towards keeping your debt as minimal as possible. And if you have debt, then you want to make a priority to paying it down. Because if you take too long to pay down your debt, then depending on what that interest rate is, you can end up paying a lot more for that thing than if you were to buy it outright. Okay, so moving along in terms of tips for managing your credit card, make sure to check your bill, right? Like I said to you, that story about when I bought the pots and totally forgot about it because it wasn't a card that I normally use. And especially nowadays when a lot of companies are going paperless with the bill. So you have to really make sure that you remember to check your bill. Plan to pay off in full each month. So to the extent that you can, whatever you're purchasing on your card, make sure you have a plan to pay it off. And this is a good concept for those who are newly starting out and getting your first card. You can start using your card by thinking about things that you know you can afford to pay, right? Or that you can afford to buy. Purchase it on your card, but when the bill comes, then you pay it off. And that's another way to help build your credit. Avoid the late payment trap. So credit card companies will say, well, you don't have to pay it right now. You can pay it a little bit later. A few things happen with that. If they may not charge you fees, some may charge fees. For those that don't charge fees, then the issue there is interest, right? So if you have a shirt that you bought for $20 and you take a very long time to pay it off, that $20 shirt could end up costing you $80 because of all the interest and fees that would have accumulated. So avoid the late payment trap. Avoid the minimum payment trap. Spoke about that as well. So with the minimum payment, you're not going to get a penalty by paying the minimum, but what would happen is you're going to take a longer time to pay off that item. And because of interest, then you'll end up paying more for it in the long run. Keep within your credit limit. So that's key. Avoid cash withdrawals or credit card checks. You'll probably see this a lot more than ever now, where credit card companies will say, well, you can take out a cash withdrawal, or you can get a credit card check. They charge a lot of fees for that. And there's a lot of behind the scenes paperwork and things that go along with that. So I advise you don't fall into that trap at all. And as I mentioned earlier, review your credit report annually on freecreditreport.com. So if you have not run your credit to look at your credit report, then make sure to do that. Now, it's important. So once per year you do this, because every time you do a hard pull, that's the term used, a hard pull on your credit, then that can lower your credit score, right? When you do the freecreditreport.com annually, there's no effect. So you make sure you do that at least once a year. Tips for managing your credit report. So what is the credit report? It's a detailed report of your credit history. It has everything that, every card that you have, any amount of debt that you have, whether it's real estate, school loans, property, all of that will be on your credit report. And I think Marcia Sutherland asked that earlier about TransUnion and Equifax. There's also Experian. So those are the three primary companies that do an assessment on what your credit score is. And I mentioned before, going to freecreditreport.com. Credit Karma is an app. So that CK that you see right there is what the app looks like. That's a good tool for you to just go on and be able to see kind of where your credit score is, some of the things that you have outstanding. And by looking at Credit Karma, it's not a hard pull on your credit. So that's a good thing to download that app. I have that app on my phone and I look at it from time to time to just make sure that things are still in line. Tips for managing debt. Just share a few tips before we wrap up. Don't add additional debt, right? You don't want to add additional debt even in good times, but especially now, if you don't have to, do not add additional debt. Something you want to think about is making a list of all of your outstanding debt and review the interest rates for all existing debt. And why is that important? There is some debt that you have that may have a higher interest rate than others, right? The ones that have a high interest rate, then you want to try to see how you can knock it out as soon as possible. And the reason being is you're going to end up paying a lot more in the long run for those things that have a high interest rate. Determine an amount you can commit to paying on a monthly basis towards debt reduction. So after you've done your budget, you've looked at all of your income, you've looked at all your expenses, then you want to now tackle the debt that you have after you've made a list of all of them and think about a dollar amount that you can commit to paying and work towards paying that every month. And once you've paid off that debt, so say if there is one debt that you have, continue to apply the same discipline to paying off the other debts until you have everything gone. And if possible, consolidate debt to a lower interest rate. Now, I'm not saying to you to go to those debt consolidation companies. You have to be very careful. There's a lot of scammers out there, especially now. For yourself, think about how you can possibly consolidate debt. And that's something that I can talk with you more in depth offline. So just as we're wrapping up, managing through financial hardship, some key points I want us to remember: discipline, 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 discipline. It's the key to everything that you can think about in life, not just finances, but everything, your health, studying the word of God, everything requires discipline. So I just want you all to remember during these hardships, this time of hardship, trust that God will supply all your needs. Now, this is something I mentioned to you earlier, and I'm not saying it because it's just something nice to hear. It's true, right? You have to trust God. You have to trust that He's going to see you through this, but make sure that you do your part. So you've learned some principles tonight. Make sure you put them into practice and trust in God to do the rest. Continue to be faithful in your tithe and your offerings. Now, your offerings may adjust a bit depending on what your financial situation is, but be faithful and continue to return your tithe. Reassess your budget and stick to it, right? So for those of you who had a budget before, kudos to you, but because of the times that we're living in, make sure that you reassess your budget and stick to it. Live below your means. Continue to reduce debt if possible. And I say if possible because some of you are in situations where you're unable to do that. But if you can, try to reduce your debt as much as possible. For those of you who are able to save, continue to save if possible. A few more things. If you file for unemployment, let them take out taxes, right? So when you file for unemployment, there's an option to say, well, should we take out taxes before or do you want to handle that later? I encourage you, let them take out the taxes, because the worst thing you want to have happen is that you have to pay taxes in the end. So those of you who have to file for unemployment, let them take out the taxes. If you don't have to use your stimulus for a dire need, save it. There's some people who are privileged to have gotten that stimulus. If you receive it and you don't need to spend it, do not spend it. I encourage you to contact your car insurance provider and see if you can reduce your insurance. And how that can happen, I had a friend who, she used to drive all the time to work. And because of everything that's happening, she doesn't drive as much. So when she called her car insurance provider, because her mileage was now reduced, it lowered her premium, right? So these are all now ways that all companies are fully aware that we're in tough times. So you want to use that to your advantage, you know, by calling some of your utility companies. Contact any creditors and debtors to see if you can receive partial forgiveness or deferment. Now, deferment should be your last resort. Why do I say that? If you're able to continue to maintain paying off your debt, then you should continue to do that. By deferring it, that doesn't mean that you're forgiving it. It's just saying that, okay, down the road, you still have to pay it, but we're going to put it on hold now. If you don't have discipline, that's a very tough position to put yourself in. So if you're able to maintain it, then continue making the payments towards repaying your debt. And the last thing, watch out for the scammers. People are going to scam like crazy, which is sad for the times that we're living in. But use your common sense. And if you have any questions, then you can feel free to reach out to me. So I'll take any final questions, but I just want to remind you again, Philippians 4:19, my God will supply all, trust me, all of your needs according to his riches and glory in Christ Jesus. So I want to thank you all for participating today. I look forward to hearing from you. And just a reminder, if you have any questions, you can send your email to contact@crystaleward.com. And if you go to my website and click on the resources page, click on budget, and you'll see a sample budget that you can fill out just to kind of get a sense for where you are financially. There's also something called a net worth assessment. We can talk about that in later detail, but you can click on that as well to give you a sense as to where you are in terms of your net worth. So at this time, I'll take any final questions or thoughts. And I just want to thank you all for participating today at Happy Hour at the Boro.
Thanks so much, Crystal. I have 4 final questions for you. The first is from Karen Sutherland. She asks, what about secured credit cards?
So secured credit cards are actually a good way to manage your credit. They're very disciplined in the sense that the funds have to be there in order for you to spend it, right? So it's secured in that the funds have to be present, but you're able to now build up your credit score. So that's a good way to use your funds by a secure credit card. But just know that because the funds have to be present, then you're not truly getting credit. So for getting access to credit, what you're able to do is to build up your score. But over time of building up your score and developing discipline, then eventually you can get a pure credit card where somebody would be extending credit to you.
Okay, great. And the second question is from Carlene. Even if your payments are on time, does the amount of outstanding debt have impact on your credit score?
So the amount of outstanding debt does have an impact in that if you have too much debt outstanding versus someone who doesn't have a lot of debt outstanding, they're typically in a better credit standing than the person who has a lot of debt. But if you're making the payments on time, then it continues to assist in building up your credit score. So the key thing with credit is making sure to manage it well, right? So credit is one aspect. That's how you're able to manage your funds and manage the credit that's been given to you. Financial management is trying to ensure that you can get that debt reduced as much as possible. See, credit card companies at the end of the day, they like when you have an outstanding. Why? Because when you have an outstanding, they make money off of the interest and the balance. So it's in your best interest to make sure that you try to pay it off as soon as possible. But in terms of managing the credit and your credit score, as long as you're making the monthly payments, then that helps to keep your credit score in line.
Okay, another question is from Keitha Roden. Says, if student loans are in forbearance with 0% interest, do you suggest making payments on the student loans if you can, or use the payments to pay down credit card debt?
So if it's in forbearance with 0% interest, and I'm glad that whoever asked that question mentioned 0% interest. If you have student loans and they talk about forbearance, you want to make sure to ask that question, because forbearance doesn't always mean that there's no interest being applied. If it's 0% interest, then you can now use those funds. If you have other types of debt that you cannot get a reduction on, then you might want to focus on paying off that debt and then focus back on your student debt once that has been paid off. If it's a situation where there is interest being applied, then you don't want to put that on hold if you're able to make the payments. So again, all of these situations depend on what your specific financial situation is. But make sure to ask the question if they put your student loan in forbearance, if there's interest being applied. If it's zero, then it kind of puts you in a good situation. If it's not zero, then now you have to assess all the debt that you have and what are the interest rates assigned to each of the debts.
And the last question of the evening, does maxing out your credit card impact your credit score?
Of course. Maxing out your credit card would suggest to someone that you are unable to manage your credit, that you're either running out of money and you're unable to like make payments and manage your funds. That's kind of how people would look at that, right? So that's why maxing out your credit is not a good thing. Now, again, if you're finding yourself in a tough situation and that is the only thing, now again, you have to look at your financial situation. You have to go through everything that we spoke about, needs versus wants. If you've gotten to the point where you are now looking at all of your needs, you've come down to the bare minimum, and the only way to survive is to use that credit card, then you may use that credit card, but you have to have a plan in place, right? You shouldn't be maxing it out just because you want to get the latest sneakers or a nice bag or anything of that nature. If you find yourself in the position where you have maxed out your card, then you want to quickly get on a plan towards paying that off and down as soon as possible. So that should never be a goal to max out your card. If you find yourself in that situation, then you want to try to rectify that as soon as possible. Again, credit card companies are in the business of making money, and they make money off of people being not disciplined and not managing their money well. So you want to be the person in the driver's seat of managing your funds.
Sorry, Crystal, one great final great question.
Okay.
I can't not ask it. Would you advise using 401k to pay debt down and pay yourself? And I'm guessing that's pay the interest.
So again, it depends, right? And I'm very careful in how I answer this, especially in this kind of forum.
Right.
So you have to think about, again, what is your personal financial situation? And what is the reason why you would be accessing your 401k? Because there are penalties and fees towards accessing your 401k, even though it's your money, because you've put those funds in before taxes, then there's a tax that you'd have to pay on that. There's the fee, then there's paying back yourself. So you have to really think about what is the reason why you want to tap into your 401k, and is it absolutely important? Whatever you're using those funds for, now you have to think about what is the potential return on your investments for those funds. Now, there are some people who might be so passionate about entrepreneurship or passionate about some idea that they have that they want to invest all of their funds towards doing it. And they have a set plan that if they do this and invest by a certain amount of time, then they'll be able to repay themselves and put themselves back into a good financial position. That's different, right? And that requires a lot of detailed planning and assessment. So I don't want to say to you and those who are listening, yeah, tap into your 401k and use those funds. There's penalties around that. But if you're at a point where you really feel like that's something you want to discuss in more detail, then reach out to me and we can talk about that more in depth. And I can give you more specific advice for you based on your situation.
Okay, once again, everyone, that Crystal's website is www.crystaleward.com. And From there, you can find her contact info, but just in case, it is contact@crystalward.com. That's her email. So you please feel free to reach out to Crystal and take all the gems that she's given us tonight. And I'm sure there are many gems that she has not shared yet that once you contact her, you can learn how to apply all of her gems to your life. And hopefully it will assist you going forward, not just through this crisis, but managing ourselves and being healthier financially in the future so that we can go out and tithe well and do God's will.
Amen. Amen to that.
Thank you so much, Crystal, for all this.
You're welcome, Keisha.
Right now, we are going to have a moment of special music. Sandra will come in and introduce our special music for the evening.
Okay, our special music is from Kingsboro's own CJ Robinson. This is his single. He actually has a single that's available on Apple and all platforms, and he's he sings on our worship teams. He sings with Kingsborough Temple's Royal Priesthood. He does solos, and he is a wonderful gift to our congregation. This is who he is.
Hey everybody, it's your boy CJ Robinson, and here's my new single, On Your Side. I hope you guys like it. I see you feel a little bit down right now. I see you feel a little bit discouraged, but I got this unattended found around. Anybody and you should feel encouraged. Turn your eyes upon him and he will guide you. Put your trust in him, cause he will always stay true. You need to know he's right there on your side. He will never leave nor forsake you. Like he did it before, he will always come through. So why don't you know he's right there on your side? He will be right there to answer all your prayers. Go ahead and cast your cares, cause you know he's gonna solve them. Yeah, so why don't you know he's right there on your side? Oh, 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 he's right there on his side. I know it's been hard to stand right now. It seems like everything is going wrong, but don't you give in. Just keep an eye on. This too shall pass. It won't be very long. What you can bear, he'll never give to you. Despite your fear, he knows what's best for you. Do you know now? He's right there on your side. He knows he really cares about you and died for you and just to save you. And he so loves you and he will never leave your side. He will be right there to answer all your prayers. Go ahead and cast your cares, cause you know he's gonna solve them. So why don't you know he's right there on your side? He will be right there to answer all your prayers. Go ahead and cast your cares, cause you know he's gonna solve them. So why don't you know he's right there on your side? Oh, 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 oh. Oh, 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 yeah. And he's on your side, on your side. Thanks.
Thank you so much. That is it for the rest of today's program. We are going to have our closing prayer. Be sure to join us next Thursday at 7 p.m. for another happy hour at the Boro. I'm going to ask Shanique.
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, I want to thank you for this opportunity where you gave us a resource such as Crystal to pour into us, to remind us that all our needs are supplied by you, and to remind us how to be good stewards of the resources that we have. You see the different various situations that we're now faced with. There are a lot of people who are now unemployed, people that are on furlough, people that are being paid 50% of their salary and wondering how to meet the various needs that we have, basic needs such as food and shelter. But we trust and we rely on you that you'll continue to supply all our needs. We continue to have faith in you, and we ask you to be with each and every one of us, to continue to be with our finances, to continue to help us to be faithful to you, and to continue to increase our faith so that we will know that in the end, all we need to do is trust in you, and you will satisfy all our needs. Thank you for hearing. Thank you for answering. Continue to bless us all. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Thank you so very much, Shanique. Thank everyone for watching. If you would like to give an offering, you can provide that to us via Zelle. Sorry, I'm just finding our Zelle info. It is treasury@kbtsda.org. If you'd like to give an offering, please give it to treasury@kbtsda.org through Zelle. Thank you so very much. We'll see you next week for another great happy hour at the Boro at 7 p.m. Have a great night and be blessed.
Come out of it.